Have you ever had the feeling that you're doing all the right things and despite that you're still feeling overwhelmed? You're taking the walks, you're trying to get enough sleep, you're making the lists, you're uber organized. And maybe you're even meditating, exercising, you're taking the supplements, you're listening to podcasts, reading the books, trying to eat better, trying to be more mindful. And you're doing all of these things, and they used to really work for you. But lately they're not doing it, or at least the relief isn't lasting. You're still feeling tired, stretched thin, waking up with too much on your mind, feeling like everything is just one more thing. And maybe the most frustrating part of this all is that, you're not incapable, you're not lazy, you have a ton of knowledge. You're actually very good at managing things and getting things done. And you probably think you should be able to figure all of this out because you always have in the past. And yet something in you is saying, when will I get this all right? And why does this keep happening? And that is what I want to talk to you about today, because sometimes when we're stressed, the source of the stress is no longer the real problem. Sometimes the real problem is the pattern underneath it. Welcome to The Pause. This is a little space to stop, to notice, to hear yourself again. And today I want to explore with you what happens when the strategies that have helped you manage stress in the past, probably even for years, start to reach the limits of what they can do for you. And I'm going to share with you 4 things that can help you realize when the source of stress is no longer the real issue, and when the pattern underneath it is what actually needs attention. Because, life is going to life. Stress doesn't just disappear. Life changes, we change, our capacities change, our responsibilities change. And sometimes that means the way that we've been managing stress has simply reached the limits of its season. And that's point number 1 today. When the stress management techniques that you've been using are no longer working. One of the things I don't think we talk enough about is that our coping strategies, our stress management techniques, have seasons. And a strategy that has been really helpful for you at one point in your life can feel completely insufficient later. Maybe it's the exercise that used to reset you. Maybe getting away for a weekend really helped you in the past. Maybe it was the yoga class that gave you the time and the room to come back to yourself. Maybe it was the organization routine that made you feel like everything was manageable again. Maybe you were just always, able to push through the busy season and count on that recovery after. But then one day, all of that or those things didn't feel the same anymore. You might be thinking, I'm doing the same thing, but I'm not getting the same result, which can be really, really unsettling. And so when something stops working, that's worked really well in the past, the instinct can be, to go harder at it, right? To exercise harder. Might be time to level up, organize more, make another list, right? Or create a new boundary. Or maybe you try to find the next thing to do, right? You research another solution, you add another practice, try another technique, book an appointment. And yes, each of those things can be really helpful, but sometimes they just become another layer on an already full stress stack. And so when the things that you used to do stop working for you, The question needs to change. It's not any longer about what else can I add. The question is, what's actually creating this? Where is this pattern coming from? Now, point number 2 is that, we often cope by adding, fixing, or escaping. When we're stressed, we tend to fall back on those familiar responses. In my Stressless Solution program, I actually call this a cycle of avoid, defeat, or deflect. And some of the underlying actions in this cycle are we try to avoid it, to outrun it. We try to fix the problem. We busy ourselves, right? We clean, we plan, we research, we make lists. We tell ourselves that once we get caught up, then we'll feel better. Once a project is done, once we get through the month, once we take the trip, once we start the new routine, once we finally get ourselves together, or sometimes we go in the opposite direction. We numb, we scroll, we binge watch something, we disappear into our phones. All of those things we do to distract ourselves or get away from the problem, or to just give us time, right? To take a break. And, all of those things happen. That doesn't mean we're bad at managing stress. It just, these things just make us human. So we try these things, but I think, that the relief is usually temporary. And that's because you're in the cycle of responding to what is happening at the surface, and you haven't really touched what is sitting underneath. And so the question here is not, how do I get out of this? The question is, how can I disrupt or break the cycle? Okay, point number 3 is that the problem may not be the pattern. And this is where I think a lot of really capable women get stuck, because they say, I know what to do. And they often do. But knowing what to do and understanding the pattern are not the same thing. The problem may be the pattern. So you know that you need a rest, but you still keep saying yes. You know that you need boundaries, and still you feel responsible for everyone. You know that you need space, and you fill it the moment it appears. You know that your work is exhausting you, and you continue organizing your life and surviving it. You know that your home is overwhelming, but you keep moving things around instead of asking what no longer belongs here. You know what your body is asking for, but you still judge yourself for not being able to do more. And that might feel hard or harsh for me to say out loud, but if you reflect on it, right, you know those patterns are happening underneath the surface. This is that voice of judgment. This is the voice of shame, or this is the voice of needing to do better, right? Often this is the internal dialogue. And that is the pattern, right? The pattern, that's that running commentary in your mind. And patterns, are really powerful because they don't always feel like patterns. They can just feel like personality, right? Your badge of honor, responsibility, being a good person, being dependable, being productive, being strong. They become familiar. They become our way of being, who we are, our brand. And they can become so familiar that we stop noticing them. I had an actual small example of that recently. I looked at a day that on paper was completely manageable. Nothing dramatic, nothing impossible. There was technically time for everything that was there. But when I looked at the day as a whole, and more importantly, when I felt about the day as a whole, I noticed how fragmented it was going to be, how fragmented my energy was going to be, moving from one thing to the other, switching roles, watching the clock, trying to fit things into the spaces between other things. And normally, in fact, quite often, I have said, yeah, it's fine, I can make it work, because I can. Right? And I think that's the way for many of us. We can make almost anything work. But I can make it work is not the same thing as this is working for me. And so I made one small change. I created more space. And what was interesting was that almost immediately, another pattern showed itself. Right? I created the space, just exactly what I said I needed. And part of me really quickly wanted to come in and fill it. And that was fascinating to me. And I've been in this work a long time, and the patterns are so deep that they really kind of sit underneath the surface. And it was still there. And that's what I mean when I talk about patterns. Stress is not simply about the amount of things we have to do. It's about what we automatically do with ourselves inside the life we've created. And so the question here is not about capability, it's a question of capacity. And that brings me beautifully to point number 4, which is capacity is not the same thing as time. And this may be one of the biggest distinctions I want to make today. There can be time on the calendar, and there may still not be capacity. We often use the clock or our calendar as evidence, right? Evidence that something fits. There's an hour, there's a gap, there's technically room, so why not, right? Why not? 60-minute opening does not necessarily mean 60 minutes of usable energy. There is transition time between things. There's mental load, recovery, preparation, emotional residue, and energetic residue. And the fact that you may have been on all day, the fact that one more conversation may be one conversation too many. And when we only look at time, we can completely miss what our body and our mind are telling us about capacity. And this is where creating calm or creating less stress starts to become less about squeezing in relaxation. It's more about changing the conditions we are living inside. And so this week, I really want you to notice something. Not to fix it, not to optimize it, just notice. When you hear yourself saying, oh, I can make this work, or telling somebody I can make this work, right? Where do you add something because technically there is room? When do you automatically say yes? When do you tell yourself you'll feel better once you get through that next thing? And most importantly, I want you to really consider, what are you tired of managing? And that is the question that's the place where I want you to pause today and just sit with that question. And you can pause this video now, or you can pause it later or contemplate it after, because it is an important question that really will help you uncover any one of the 4 considerations that I've shared today. Because the answer sometimes tells us much more than what stress management technique should I try next. There's a big difference. And this is really getting to the heart of my work inside the Stress Less Solution program. Because it is not about giving you another long list of things to do. It is not about helping you become better at coping with unsustainable patterns. It's about helping you see what is actually creating the stress. Not the person, not the place, not the thing, not the external circumstances, the habits, the expectations, the responsibilities, the automatic responses, the ways that you've learned over time to keep functioning. And the things, quite honestly, that have helped you survive a very demanding season in your life have probably helped you thrive, have helped you really create this person that you are today, successful, highly capable person. But they maybe no longer fit the life that you're longing for or trying to create. Because at a certain point, the stress or the source of stress is no longer the problem. It's the pattern. And once we can see the pattern, we can begin to change the conditions around it. This is what I mean when I say we transform our relationship with stress. And I am beginning conversations right now around the next cohort of the Stress Less Solution program. And if you've been thinking about this, and as you listen and you're saying, that's me, I'm doing all the things and I'm still overwhelmed. Then just send me a message. You do not need to know rather exactly what needs to change, because that's part of the work. And like I said, the question this week isn't how can I manage everything better? It's what am I still trying to manage that no longer belongs in this life that I'm building? Calm does not begin with another practice, another technique. It begins by seeing things clearly, having clarity, seeing the pattern, seeing the pressure, seeing what has reached its capacity, and giving yourself permission to respond differently. Because sometimes that realization that what you've been doing isn't working anymore is the most important realization. And that realization doesn't mean failure. That means you're ready for transformation. And that is beautiful. So thank you for joining me in today's pause. It's this little space to stop, to notice, and to hear yourself again. Namaste.